Since ancient times, human beings have been driven by an irresistible desire to explore the world around them, to understand its geography, its boundaries, its landscapes, and its seas. Ancient maps are a tangible manifestation of this impulse. They are the crystallization on paper of knowledge about the shape of the Earth and the distribution of land masses and oceans. Yet in some cases, these maps reveal something more than just borders and coastlines. Sometimes they show seemingly anachronistic details, outlines of lands that would only be discovered in later eras, or unusual depictions that seem to challenge the official chronology of history and exploration. One of the most famous examples of these so-called impossible maps is the Piri Reis map, created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. Discovered only in 1929 in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, it shows part of the South American coastline with remarkable accuracy, at a time when the idea of a new world had not yet been fully assimilated or formalized in European maps. But Piri Reis is not the only one. Orontius Finaeus, for example, a French mathematician and cartographer who lived in the 16th century, created a map in 1531 that, according to some scholars, seems to depict the Antarctic continent with an accuracy that officially should not exist. The fundamental mystery and the fascination surrounding these ancient maps lie in a very intriguing question. Is it possible that their authors drew from much older sources, handed down by a lost civilization? Is it possible that in the distant past there existed a culture with extremely advanced geographical and cartographic knowledge, whose legacy has survived in a fragmented form, reaching us through maps like those of Piri Reis, Orontius Finaeus, and other cartographers? Today we will explore these ancient documents and venture into a distant past that seems to have vanished from collective memory, but appears to have left behind fascinating clues just waiting to be analyzed. But as always, before we embark on this exciting journey, which we are sure will not leave you indifferent, we invite you to subscribe to the channel because your support is essential to help our work. The map of Piri Reis was discovered in 1929 by a group of historians who were cataloging the artifacts kept inside the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. Imagine the researchers' surprise when they found this map made on gazelle skin parchment, which illustrated in great detail the coasts of West Africa, Europe, and part of the American continent. The year of creation reported by the document, 1513, made this map one of the oldest European representations of the New World. But there was a big problem. The accuracy of certain sections, particularly along the coast of South America, made this map impossible for that time. How could Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral who lived in the early 1500s, have such accurate information about regions of the globe that were presumed to have been only recently discovered by Spanish and Portuguese navigators? In the notes on the map, the author himself stated that he had used various sources, including older European maps, Arab documents, and even charts traceable to Christopher Columbus. But there were also more mysterious mentions of a possible map of Alexander, referring to an even more ancient document, perhaps from the Ptolemaic era or even earlier, on which Piri Reis might have based part of his knowledge.
This map was drawn in the year 1513 by the hand of Piri, son of Hachi Mehmed, known as the nephew of Kemal Reis. May God have mercy on both of them. It was composed using about 20 charts and maps of the world, that is, some charts made in the time of Alexander, and an Arab chart of Hind, Sindh, and China, and also Portuguese maps and the chart of Columbus. From each of them, what seemed most accurate was extracted so that the Great Sea, called the Western Ocean, would be represented as a whole. In this way, all the coasts and islands of those regions have been outlined and depicted on this map.
It is therefore possible that Piri Reis did nothing more than copy or rework ancient maps inherited from a very distant past. Some independent scholars, including the famous Charles Hapgood, professor of the history of science, suggest that the Piri Reis map shows some anachronistic features, which leads to the belief that he somehow drew from mysterious knowledge, such as the existence of a very ancient civilization that was lost. The coastlines of South America, as depicted by Piri Reis, appear too accurate for that era. Furthermore, the presence of references to almost correct latitudes would suggest the use of measurement techniques, such as spherical projection, which theoretically were not accessible to 16th century geographers at such a refined level. But we'll come back to all this in a moment. Before proceeding, it's necessary to clarify one point. Many school textbooks and popular publications suggest that before Christopher Columbus, most people thought the Earth was flat. In reality, the ancient Greeks had already demonstrated the Earth's sphericity. Consider Pythagoras, who hypothesized the spherical shape, or Eratosthenes, who made extraordinarily precise measurements of the Earth's circumference using the shadow of the sun in two distant locations. In the Islamic world during the Middle Ages, geographers recovered and deepened this knowledge, enriching it with new observations. In the Renaissance, then, the idea that the Earth was a globe was well established among scholars. The image of Columbus convincing the Spanish monarchs of a spherical Earth against a supposed popular belief in a flat Earth is largely the result of later interpretations and a romantic narrative that developed in the following centuries. Geographical knowledge during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance was often transmitted through portolans, ancient nautical charts, travel accounts, and oral testimonies. The Ottoman Empire, thanks to its strategic position between East and West, was a crossroads of cultural and commercial exchanges. It is not surprising, then, that an Ottoman cartographer could access a wide variety of sources. But where did these original sources come from? The most fascinating theory is that there was a thread of knowledge dating back to an antediluvian, or at least pre-classical era, and that the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, and later the Europeans partially inherited its content. However, they were not able to fully understand the measurement techniques used by the original authors. Piri Reis, like other cartographers, could therefore have gotten his hands on fragments of this ancient heritage, reworking and integrating them with the most recent travel reports. And among the maps that appear interesting in this context, we certainly find the one by Orontius Finaeus, a mathematician and cartographer who lived in France. And in 1531, he published a map of the world in a cordiform projection, that is, heart-shaped, in which there are details represented that he could not have known, since they were unknown at the time. In particular, what strikes the imagination of those who study this map is the representation of the southern continent, where a large stretch of land seems to be located. At the South Pole, separated from South America and Africa by narrow oceanic passages. Some authors have noted that the general shape of this southern continent is surprisingly reminiscent of the outline of Antarctica, although partially lacking the ice caps that cover it today. The absence of the ice caps is a very interesting element for our analysis, because the last time it was possible to observe Antarctica without ice on its coastal areas was about 12,000 years ago, during the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene. So how is it possible that a cartographer from the 16th century was aware of such geographical details? The most common academic explanation is that Orontius Finaeus was simply following the Ptolemaic tradition, which hypothesized the existence of a vast Terra Australis, an unknown land considered necessary to balance the northern continental masses. The ancient Greeks and Romans actually imagined that the world was a harmonious and balanced whole. If there was a vast continental mass in the northern hemisphere of the planet, it was believed that something equally large had to exist in the southern hemisphere to compensate for or balance the distribution of land. Today, in reality, we know that this is not the case. In fact, there is more land in the northern hemisphere than in the southern hemisphere. However, according to several researchers, the Ptolemaic tradition is not enough to explain all the anomalies found in these ancient maps. Independent historians actually believe that this view may have been influenced by earlier maps that depicted the shape of Antarctica before it was covered by ice. And so there is a sort of parallel between the map of Piri Reis and that of Orontius Finaeus. This scenario becomes even more fascinating if you consider the similarities between the areas shown on Orontius Finaeus's map and present-day Antarctica. In fact, if we overlay it onto a modern world map, we find some quite significant correspondences with the polar continent, especially along the Antarctic Peninsula. It is also true that there are some discrepancies between Orontius Finaeus's map and the Antarctic continent. But if we assume that this map was the result of copies, and that it refers to a remote era, this could be considered normal, whether due to errors or adjustments made by different authors, or to a change in the morphology of a territory caused by various upheavals that affected the planet. But, as we were saying, there are many documents. Another map worth mentioning is definitely the one by Philippe Buache, a French geographer from the 18th century, who proposed a map that featured a representation of Antarctica without ice, showing two large islands separated by an inland sea. This configuration is very interesting because it surprisingly matches the results of modern research on the geological profile of the Antarctic continent, which, beneath the polar ice cap, features areas of sea and mountain ranges very similar to the representation we find in Buache's map. To this, we can add another famous map, that of the renowned Flemish cartographer Gerardus Mercator, where in this case as well, there is an Antarctic continent with a considerable extension. In the letters written by Mercator, there are also references to ancient and medieval sources, such as the Memoirs of a certain Jacobus Knoyen, written partly in Latin and partly in Dutch, which described unknown lands. Although most of the content was presumably fantastical, the hypothesis of a transmission of real knowledge mixed with legendary tales cannot be ruled out a priori.
I tried to trace in my archive the indications left by Knoyen, written partly in Latin and partly in his native language. But many chapters are missing, and some passages appear obscure. However, from the accounts of the sailors from the north, it seems to me that there is some truth mixed in, though with fables and marvelous tales.
As we have seen, there are many maps that describe the existence of the Antarctic continent, and all of this before the continent was actually discovered. We have also seen that since ancient times, people were well aware of the Earth's sphericity, and that the idea of a flat Earth is a fictionalized notion of the past, born in later times. We have analyzed these maps, but there are many others. It's inevitable to consider that if there had been only a single map with these anomalies, we could have attributed the error to chance or luck. But since several maps show these oddities, it's hard to believe it's just a coincidence. It makes you suspect there might be something more. The conventional explanation interprets the existence of these peculiarities through the Ptolemaic tradition and the theory of continental equilibrium. In the case of Piri Reis's map, historians also add that the continent depicted and mistaken for Antarctica would actually be a continuation of the South American continent. And could the reason for its unusual position be explained as a simple assembly error, perhaps caused by the use of some Portuguese maps that were influenced by the Treaty of Tordesillas? In 1494, the so-called Line of Demarcation, also known as the Line of Ore, was drawn, which would determine which newly discovered lands belonged to the Spanish and which to the Portuguese. The lands to the west of this line were assigned to Spain and those to the east to Portugal. Piri Reis's map may have been influenced by geopolitical interests, and the positional error of the South American coast, which turned eastward, could be due to incorrect reports, perhaps intentionally, with the aim of assigning more lands to Portuguese rule by moving them eastward. But are we sure that the line of demarcation and the Ptolemaic conception of the Earth are enough to rule out the hypothesis that there was a city in a remote era, an advanced civilization capable of mapping the globe with surprising accuracy? Almost all cultures on the planet preserve stories, mythical or legendary, of an ancient catastrophe that wiped out an entire civilization. From the biblical account of the Great Flood to the Mesopotamian stories of Gilgamesh, to the myths of India and the legendary 4 Aztec sons, there is a widespread obsession with a destructive event of immense proportions: Plato. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he tells the story of Atlantis, an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which was said to have dominated much of the known world at that time, only to sink into ruin in a single disastrous day. Is it therefore possible that the anomalies found in these ancient maps are the reflection of an ancient collective memory, linked to a real cataclysm that happened in the distant past, perhaps at the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago? If that were the case, the survivors of an advanced civilization might have passed down to later peoples maps and geographical knowledge that, over the millennia, would have been recopied, modified, and fragmented until they merged into the so-called impossible maps, which still arouse questions and curiosity today. One of the first to support this hypothesis was the historian Charles Hapgood, who, by analyzing the oldest maps, noticed the depictions of lands that could not be known. But not only that, he found evidence of advanced cartographic skills that could not have been known in the 1500s. Let's go back to analyzing the map of Piri Reis. As we said, part of the South American coast seemed to appear curved in an unusual way. According to Hapgood, this distortion would not be the result of a surveying error, nor of a deliberate modification for political purposes, such as altering borders to favor Portugal or Spain. Rather, it seems to be the sign of a sophisticated cartographic technique based on a spherical projection instead of a flat representation. These elements would indicate that the original authors of the map used spherical trigonometry, an advanced mathematical method for calculating distances and angles on a curved surface. This method was only known in much more recent times. In other words, whoever drew the original map did so taking into account the sphericity of the Earth, and then adapted it to a flat surface. Over time, however, this mathematical and cartographic knowledge would have been lost, and those who, in the following centuries, found themselves with these ancient maps in their hands were no longer able to fully understand them. So, later cartographers simply copied the documents without realizing the real implications of their structure, contributing to the apparent anomalies that we find today in these fascinating and mysterious maps. Thank you. To recap what we've said so far, we can say that there are a series of ancient and mysterious maps that describe lands with incredible accuracy, but that's not all. Some of them depict the Antarctic continent, which at the time they were drawn was not known. All of this seems to be evidence of a civilization that existed before the ones we know, a civilization that had advanced knowledge of our planet. The existence of an unknown civilization capable of navigating all the seas of the world and able to create an accurate map of our planet. It inevitably connects with a series of archaeological discoveries found all over the world, which are still shrouded in mystery today. Just think of the Mesoamerican cultures, the Indus civilization, all the way to the Mesopotamian peoples in ancient Egypt. To all this, we can add the recent discoveries of Göbekli Tepe and Pumapunku. Connecting all of this, there is also a specific historical moment, a date that echoes several times. We are talking about 12,900 years ago, a time when it was possible to observe for the last time the coasts and part of the inland of the Antarctic continent, free of ice. This was followed by an era of mysterious upheavals that led to a sudden cooling which lasted about 1,200 years and caused a mass extinction that affected many species of large animals, including mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, and other large herbivores and predators. 12,900 years ago is a date that also resonates in myths, in the oldest traditions found in human cultures all over the world, a journey through the cultures of the past from the Sumerians to the Mayans, from Vedic mythology to biblical mythology. We can choose to ignore all this. We can think that all this is just the result of chance, but by not investigating in this direction, we run the risk of erasing an important part of our past and who knows, maybe even of our future. At this point, we're curious to know your opinion. What do you think about these ancient maps we've talked about today? They are a new clue that invites us to investigate a forgotten page of our history. Let us know in the comments what you think, and if you haven't done it yet, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because your support is essential for our work.